Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here. Today I wanted to take a look at the best performing deck in Historic from the most recent set championships, which was Green-White Company. The list I'm going to showcase is Simon Nielsen's list, but there's a lot of people in the top 16 who were playing this list. The list I've got up on the screen right now is not the Green-White Company list. It's a mono-white humans list that was the deck I worked on probably the most before the set championships for Historic. I wound up playing my Esper Tainted Pact deck, which was a little bit disappointing result. I went 3 and 5 with the deck. It really, I did well in the standard portion, and my Historic result is what held me back. This is the deck that I tested the most, and I liked it a lot in a bunch of matchups. The one matchup I just thought was completely hopeless was the Golgari food deck. Elicases just beat me absolutely senseless with Meat Hook Massacre and Culling Ritual in testing, and it really just caused me to give up on this deck because I thought that that was going to be a popular enough deck that you couldn't just have a horrific matchup against it and expect to do well. So before we look at the Green-White Humans list, which what I'm going to be interested in looking at is that a way to make the Golgari food matchup better for one of these humans decks? Let's just briefly go over, what I liked about this deck is that it had a really low curve. And I also in testing discovered that there's this interaction where if you have a Containment Priest in play, you can play Fragment Reality and your opponent just gets nothing. Fragment Reality is just a good card on its own in a lot of matchups. Especially in the set championships, we play with open deck lists, meaning that you can know for a fact whether or not your opponent's going to be able to get, a 1-drop or a 2-drop based on what their deck list is. So sometimes you're going to get to cast it and kill something that's actually expensive, and you're going to know they're going to get nothing. Even in spots where they're getting something that's tapped, so you're downgrading whatever their permanent is, and they're getting a tapped version. So it's a way to force through damage. Obviously, that's not ideal. But if you're casting this card for 1 mana and you're getting to exile whatever you want, with the exception of Planeswalkers, and they're getting nothing because you have a Containment Priest in play, that's an incredibly powerful card. So I like that synergy in this deck. I also like the fact that I just had a really low curve. I'm not playing anything that costs more than 3. I'm playing 23 lands. Sadly, one of the issues in Historic if you play a deck like this is you really don't get that much value out of your lands. You would think if you're a mono-colored deck, you could get really, really strong lands. And just in white, they aren't that strong. A lot of that is because Cave of the Frost Dragon just isn't that good of a card. So I do have some Castle Ardenvales, which is also a card I don't think is a particularly good card. It's kind of nice with Thalia's Lieutenant. This is a really, really good Thalia's Lieutenant deck. Just because you have such a low curve and almost all your creatures are humans, with the exception of the Skyclave Apparition. And then I've got like Mobilized District and Chefet Dunes, which that's nobody's idea of a great card, but it's a serviceable card. So anyway, this is the list that I worked on and I didn't play. Given the matchups I got at the set championships, which was a lot of really bad matchups for Tainted Pact. Like I had to play against Blue-White Affinity multiple times. I had to play against Blue-White Auras. And those like aggressive Esper Sentinel decks that also have counters is the worst matchup for Tainted Pact for sure. So I really wish that I had registered this deck instead. But let's jump to the deck that actually did well in the tournament. That's going to be this Green-White Company deck. And let's look at what are the differences, what are the similarities, and then I'm going to run it through some matches to see how it performs. So right away, massive differences. They've got 4 companies, 4 Inquisitor Captains. So they're really committed to this plan of 4-mana card that's going to put 2 bodies into play. Now, obviously, in my list, I was playing Containment Priest in my deck, so you're not going to put these cards in your deck if you're playing with Containment Priest. That just wouldn't work. So they don't have that. And also, when you play these cards, the thing I don't like about them is it drags your curve up. It makes the overall casting cost of your deck more expensive, both because you're putting 4-drops in your deck and because you don't want to just have a ton of 1-mana cards in your deck, because you're really sad if you have to put a 1-drop in play with Inquisitor Captain. You're hoping to put a 3-drop in play. Same thing with Collected Company. You're hoping to hit 2 3-drops or 3-drop and a 2-drop. You don't really want to hit 2 1-drops. That really, you're not getting a good result from the card. So if you look at the 1-mana plays, where I had 12 1-mana creatures and 4 1-mana instants in my deck, this deck only has 7 1-mana creatures in it. So very big difference there, higher curve. In their 2-drops, we have pretty much the same 2-drops, except obviously they don't have Containment Priest. They have 1 extra Thalia. And then they have these Katildas, which Katilda is a card I've always liked. I'm not sure that it's actually, I mean, it's certainly not a historic all-star. It's perhaps serviceable in this deck, I would say. It is nice that it ramps you from 2 mana to 4 mana, given how many 4 mana cards you have in the deck. And then the 3-drops are basically the same, slightly different mix. I think they have 1 more Skyclave Apparition, where I had, you know, an additional 1-mana card. And this is what happens when you try to build your deck around Company and Inquisitor Captain, is that you wind up just wanting to play more 3-drops. So that makes sense. They have 25 land, where I was playing 23. And they have 2 Eiganjos in their deck. That's interesting. Because certainly in the mono white list, you could have easily played 2 Eiganjos if you wanted to. They have 2 Cave of the Frost Dragons, where I had like Mobilized District. I think Mobilized District is a slightly better card, but in a 2-color deck, you're not going to want to play colorless lands. They do have Boseiju, which Boseiju is a really, really strong land, so that's nice. And then they've got duels, kind of the duels you'd expect. 2 Forsaken Crossroads, that's a little bit somewhat unusual, but I think it makes a lot of sense to play in a 2-color aggressive deck in Historic, where you don't have access to one of the fast lands. Razorverge Thicket, I think is the name of the green-white fast land. That hasn't been printed in a really long time, so it's not available on Arena. So that's the main deck. You know, pretty straightforward Company deck. I think that basically the appeal of this deck is that Esper Sentinel's a really strong card against, like, Izzet Phoenix. Just the Esper Sentinel Thalia combination's really strong against them, especially if you're making creatures bigger with Thalia's Lieutenant, and you've got a pretty fast clock. So I think that that's where the real appeal of this deck is. And the question for me is, if you build your deck this way, does it actually wind up being better against Golgari Food? I think that's possible. My issue with Golgari Food was that the sweepers were so good against me. And here, they're less vulnerable to Culling Ritual because they do have a higher curve. Also, Collected Company just as an instant speed way to rebuild your board after a Meat Hook Massacre, that's pretty appealing. So I could see where this deck would be better against food. I'm not sure that it's enough better that you're actually, in the course of a 3-game match, like you're going to actually be doing that well. If you looked at that results matrix, they went 50-50 over the course of not that many matches in the set championship. I think on social media, like Simon Nielsen posted that he beat Golgari Food at one point, and he said he'd beaten his bad matchup, which I'm not surprised that they regarded that as their bad matchup. It's probably not as bad of a matchup as the mono white version was, though. Looking at the sideboard, there's a couple interesting things. There's 2 Tormod's Crypts and 1 Unlicensed Hearse. That's kind of an interesting mix. It's a little bit surprising to me they aren't just playing more Hearses. They have 3 Kraul Harpooners, which this is like a tech card against Ledger Shredder. That was a pretty cool innovation they came up with. Some Outland Liberators, which that's just generally a good card. And it's a human, which matters for, you know, your Thalia's Lieutenant synergy and the Katilda. So it's kind of cool. 4 Skyclave Apparition, that makes a lot of sense. And then they also have Brutal Cathars in their sideboard, which this is something I've talked about in prior mono white videos, which is something they've also came to the same conclusion, that Brutal Cathar is just not a good main deck card in Historic. It's too bad against all of the Unholy Heat decks. The matchup where you want Brutal Cathar is if you're playing against like white-blue auras, something like that isn't going to have a 1-mana way that just kills it where they get their creature back. Or in the case of the blue-white auras, even if they can kill it for 1 mana, you will have probably knocked all the auras off of their creature. So I think it makes a lot of sense to play main deck Skyclave Apparition over Brutal Cathar, even though this is a human synergies deck. You know, The Brutal Cathar works with Thalia's Lieutenant and Katilda. Skyclave Apparition does not, but Skyclave Apparition is just an enough better card that you should not be prioritizing having the human version in your main deck. One Elspeth Resplendent. That's kind of a interesting card. I guess this is probably a good card against Golgari Food, because the food decks generally are not very good at attacking opposing planeswalkers if you're just putting a bunch of creatures in play. And it has the ability to generate a lot of flying threats, which is pretty nice. So that's pretty interesting. So that's the deck. I'm going to run it through a few matches. I'm just going to play on the ladder, so I don't know if I'm going to get to play against food or not. Hopefully I do, but we'll just get to see it in action some. So let's check it out. This is an excellent hand, even though a little bit short on lands, but getting to be on the play and go Esper Sentinel into Thalia is obviously great. And even if I break on lands, the Thalia's Lieutenant's going to be a pretty strong card. Probably playing some sort of... it's not a mirror match. I'm playing against a life gain theme deck. Probably the taxing ability of the Esper Sentinel is not particularly good against a Soul Warden deck. I'm not surprised they didn't want to trade there. I want to play the Lieutenant this turn. Gives me a slightly better attack, or I could just play that Ranger-Captain. I think I'm going to play the Ranger-Captain this turn. The longer you wait on the Lieutenant, usually the more value you get out of it. And again, if they wanted to trade one of their life gain creatures for the Esper Sentinel, I'm fine with that. This is probably the Heliod Scurryoak combo deck. I think I'm going to take the Giant Killer. This is good in case they have Trelasara in their deck, or the whatever the Voice of the Blessed, I think is the name of it, the one that's like a mono-white version of Trelasara. And there we go, Trelasara. I'm going to need to draw 4th land to be able to get rid of the Trelasara. Because of my own Thalia, the tax is coming back to bite me. They've scried to the top, which means it's almost definitely a land they put on top. Get rid of this. Not really dealing damage to them fast enough. This is going to be a problem. Because I can't win without putting more creatures into play. Maybe I can company and get some Skyclave Apparitions, but I don't even have that many Skyclave Apparitions in my deck. The lunch veteran, what's for lunch? case you haven't ever seen it before, they have an infinite combo now, where for as long as they're willing to sit here and click, they can keep growing their Scurry Oak, making 1/1s, gaining 3 life at a time, which they can make all of their creatures as large as they want because of the Heliod. So I'm not coming back from that. This is the kind of matchup where you want Skyclave Apparitions, you want Brutal Cathars, you want Portable Holes. What don't I want? The Thalias seem quite poor. Let's get rid of those for starters. Esper Sentinel is also sadly kind of bad. Does this thing do anything? Heliod is indestructible, so probably not. This doesn't do anything. I might want this card. It's just a way to find more Brutal Cathars and Skyclave Apparitions. I think it just comes down to what do I want in my deck. I think rather than having an Esper Sentinel, I'll just play an Outland Liberator, which probably won't have any targets, but I think just a 2-mana 2/2 is better than the 1-mana 1/1. They probably only have companies that would ever trigger this. It's for lunch. Well, if I draw running lands, my hand is going to be very good. One of the running lands plan. Sadly, it's a tap land. They're going to company, so probably the Adeline would not have gotten a 1/1. I guess I should have played it first. There's no way they don't have company in their hand, though. The real question is, when they company, are they going to hit Belisar? It's nice of them to company before I attack. So now I really need to draw a land next turn. I guess I can just Ranger-Captain and get Giant Killer and maybe... I'm not in that bad a shape. Of course, they could also just have Scurry Oak in their hand right now. And then the game is over. This seems like a horrifically bad matchup for Green-White Company. Them having all of the life gain creatures in the combo is just, it's kind of too much. But this is not, this Green-White life gain deck is not a deck you would expect to play against the set championship all that much. So it's not surprising, or it's not really a big deal that they showed up with a deck that was not good in this matchup. So I need to chump the Heliod now. That's not very good. Actually, I'm just dead on board, I think. No, they didn't distribute the counters quite. If they had put the counters slightly differently, they could have attacked and I would be dead. They needed to make both of these things 2/2s. and attack with the Heliod in those two, and then I would just be dead. As it stands, though, get rid of this. This thing stops being a creature. Guess I'm not technically dead. I think I'm dead to any spell or any untapped land, so that's not good. Actually, I'm dead on board. They can just use Castle Ardenvale to put a creature into play, and they get 3+1/+1 counters from that. I will say that was a matchup that the mono-white version would have been a lot better in. Having 4 Containment Priests and also having 4 Fragment Realities would obviously be great against that deck. Alright. Do I want this? I think I should just play this land turn 1. Rather than having to play it on turn 3, potentially. They're a red-blue deck. So this is the matchup I think that my deck was built to beat. So let's see how it does. A backup Ledger Shredder. Now it's a 2/4. Not drawing any Esper Sentinels or Thalia's Lieutenants is pretty bad in this matchup. Here's the Thalia. Is it better to just... Should I go Thalia, Thalia's Lieutenant? Let them connive? I think so. It's possible I played these in the wrong order. I basically have a choice here. Do I want a +1/+1 counter on Thalia or a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant? I think maybe I wanted to counter on the Lieutenant instead. It's so likely that they'll use whatever removal spell they have on the Thalia. And it's unlikely they have spells in their deck that only deal 1 damage. So I could set up the Giant Killer, the Ledger Shredder, potentially. I think I'm just going to play Inquisitor Captain. Yeah. If I had a Skyclave Apparition, it's great. If I had another Thalia's Lieutenant, that would be great. Adeline is a little less great, but still fine. Maybe I want Katilda, actually. We'll play Katilda. That will allow us to go get a Giant Killer this turn. But I cannot cast it. I don't think this is a spot where I want to sack the Ranger-Captain of Eos. They're at a really high life total. And they could potentially cast, you know, instants in response. This is a Phoenix deck that has Symmetry Sage in it, which that's... My teammates at the set championship did that. I don't think it's generally that popular. It's really not that bad for me. They're still in really bad shape. They attack with both of these. I get down to 12. I guess if they had a triple Phoenix turn next turn, they would kill me, but it's going to be pretty hard through a Thalia. Alright, cards are good. I think I want the Hearse, the Tormod's Crypts probably, the Harpooners. Do I want Skyclave Apparition post board? Portable Hole also has some possibilities. Probably if you watched all the feature match coverage carefully, you could figure out how they boarded. But I do not know. So I'm just going to do what makes sense to me. I think I'd like a Skyclave Apparition in my deck. Actually, let's split the difference between the Skyclave Apparitions and the Ranger-Captain of Eos. It's unlikely that this is really the optimal way to sideboard, but I'm not really sure which of those two is better in this matchup. Going to get this out here now. If Ledger Shredder didn't exist, I would probably tend to want to hold this until I would play it next turn, basically, because I don't think you don't need to get it in play before the turn where they're going to put Phoenixes into play. But I don't want to be in a spot where I'm giving them a free connive with a Ledger Shredder because I feel like I need to have this in play before their Phoenix turn. So it didn't wind up working out that they played a turn 2 Ledger Shredder, but had they played a turn 2 Ledger Shredder, it would have been bad if I had cast the Tormod's Crypt that turn. There's the Ledger Shredder. And they didn't have another spell, so I do not think they're going to enjoy this experience. This thing has reach. It's been a long time since I played with this card. It does have reach. I'll just trade it off with the Phoenix if they are interested in that. I'm willing to make this trade because I have the Tormod's Crypt. Opponent is not even interested in it. This is going to be an expensive Pillar of Flame. Backup Tormod's Crypt. Not a very good draw. How does Kraul Harpooner work if the creature loses flying between when it's targeted? Like if I Harpooner the Dragon's Rage Channeler and then Crypt them with the targeting on the stack, I think it'll cause the target to fizzle, so it wouldn't resolve. I'm not 100% sure. I guess these crypts have been better this game than Hearst would have been, just because I'm tight on mana. This deck does, like I said, it has a pretty high curve for being a... this isn't really an aggro deck, this is more like a mid-range deck. So I guess it makes more sense to play the 0 mana card. In these, when you play against Phoenix, their deck is so mana efficient that you really can't afford to play things that aren't particularly efficient. So Crypt makes a lot of sense here. On the play with 2 Esper Sentinels, nice. I do have an option there as to whether to play the Eiganjo turn 1 or the Pathway and set it to white. I think it's pretty clear in this hand that I'm going to be needing to make my land drop with the Eiganjo, and this would be my only source of green mana, potentially. Opponent has Evolving Wilds in their deck. I'm even going to set the second one to white, just in case I draw a green land, so I can play Adeline next turn. If I were to draw, you know, 2 more white lands, it wouldn't even be that big of a disaster, because I would just play Inquisitor Captains instead of this Collected Company. So I'm going to attack them this turn. It seems very likely that they're going to play some sort of spell that triggers Symmetry Sage, so they will probably get to eat an Esper Sentinel. They might have a card like Unholy Heat to, you know, kill an Esper Sentinel, eat an Esper Sentinel. But I'm getting free 1/1 out of the deal. I'm going to get to draw a card off of one of the Esper Sentinels. And I'm getting 4 damage. Or they have absolutely nothing, and I just get it all. Oh, that was fortunate. I think this, well, I don't really know what their deck is. Maybe it's like a budget version of the kind of Symmetry Stage Wizards beatdown deck. I played Company over Inquisitor Captain there just to try to maximize my chances of getting a Skyclave Apparition to eat the Symmetry Sage. This is the first time I've ever seen anyone cast this spell. Wow, a lot of stuff going on now. They didn't discard anything. I like my Esper Sentinel too much to sacrifice it just to keep a 1/1, deal an extra damage. we whiffed. Put one of them on the battlefield. I don't even have an option not to. So what happens if I attack with everyone, and let's say they have an Unholy Heat? They would kill Thalia, maybe. They're still forced to block the Adeline. So I think that'd be fine. This probably goes badly if they have 2 Unholy Heats. If they kill the Thalia and then kill the Esper Sentinel. This would be a 4-power creature, which they would then be double blocking. Esper Sentinel's just so good against the style of deck my opponent's playing. Same thing with Thalia. Against them... Well, the Harpooner's obviously great against the Symmetry Sage. So that's a fun bonus. Probably... I don't need Skyclave Apparition. I might want Portable Hold, though. I'm gonna guess they're not the kind of deck that Giant Killer's good against. Let's try that. Portable Hole is nice because they might have Soulscar Mage in their deck. It's good to have a card that can deal with that. I assume that the opponent is just playing Evolving Wilds for budget reasons, that maybe they don't have Steam Vents or Spire Bluff Canals yet. Gotta work with what you got. I do feel like this, having 8 4-mana cards feels like a lot to me. I've gotten a bunch of clunky draws. Maybe I should be mulliganing more aggressively. This doesn't seem like it was a bad hand, though. It was a hand that had 1 too many 4-mana cards in it, but I don't think that's enough to make you want to mulligan. Especially because I had a 1-mana interactive card. It'd be very nice to hit a Kraul Harpooner here. Kraul Harpooner. You're not a Kraul Harpooner. So if I company, I deal more damage. I don't think there's a reason to wait. Also, I'm going to play this Eiganjo as a land because I think there's no reason that I would ever expect to Need to use 2 Eiganjos. I guess I could also just go Thalia plus Eiganjo on their turn. And if they don't draw an additional land, they might not be able to get the Sprite Dragon big enough to actually live through the Eiganjo, so let's do that. I am presenting a probably lethal clock, too. Now that they have a land, I'm just going to Eiganjo the Symmetry Sage. I don't think I need to risk it trying to get the Harpooner. Well, never mind. They played a pre-combat Symmetry Sage. I guess their plan is they want to play 1 spell and buff the Sprite Dragon and the Symmetry Sage with the Symmetry Sage triggers, so they deal slightly more damage. Yeah, that actually, if they have 1 spell, they get up to 8 damage this way. They have no spells. They get nothing. So this could go badly if they have like Unholy Heat plus a 1 mana card. They could get their guy up to a 5/5. I think if they had all of that, though, they would have just tried to kill me, probably. I'm playing Company here over Inquisitor Captain because it gives me the highest chance to hit cards that would immediately impact the board, which would basically just be Kraul Harpooner, Skyclave Apparition, stuff like that. The 3/3 body of the Inquisitor Captain, which was the other choice, would not have had any impact on the board. I don't know what is in their hand, but it does not seem like it's good, whatever it is. I take it back. That was a really good card. It was a really good card. It's not going to be enough, but that was surprising and good. It's made a 5. I'm going to start on Thalia, which will cut them off from being able to cast any spells, and then I'll play this Inquisitor Captain, and if I hit a Kraul Harpooner, do they die? I think they do. I keep failing in my quest to find Kraul Harpooners. It's very sad. I guess this is a spot where I'll Ranger-Captain them. I'm sure the deck has a bunch of instants, but if they somehow have like Static Discharge in their deck, it'd be good to do this now. Static Discharge is kind of like it's a 1 and a red, deal 3 damage sorcery. So this really only shuts off sorceries from them, but I don't think I need the extra 3/3 body to push through lethal damage next turn, so I might as well do it. It also shuts off the Expressive Iteration. Evidently it was good enough. Well, that was the green-white deck. We didn't get to see it against food, sadly, that's the matchup I would want to know more about if I was trying to decide between playing green-white versus playing my mono-white build that I showed at the beginning. We did get to see that the green-white Esper Sentinel Thalia shell is very good against the blue-red spells decks, which I would say that the mono-white version is also very good against that. That green-white combo company deck, I think, was pretty clearly a bad matchup. And I don't know that that's a matchup I would worry about that much if I was going to take the deck into a tournament, because that's just not a very popular deck in Historic anymore. It was popular for a while, but I think people realized that it just wasn't quite good enough against the actual top decks. So it's not a deck that you play against very often in tournaments. Certainly, if you're doing well in a tournament, it's unlikely you're going to get paired against that deck, which is an important consideration when picking a deck for a tournament. Hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I will catch you next time.